We've seen the basics of global illumination so far, and we've seen how to set it up, get it kick-started, and using the automatic mode, and so on and so forth. Now it's time to come into a real production scene and complicate things a lot more and see what happens when we go for a real scene and what kind of challenges will arise when trying to use global illumination in a more complex project. So let's go ahead and open up an example scene that I have here for you. And the scene is going to be called 03 Scene Apartment GI Start. So let's open up that start scene. And what we have here is a scene here of an apartment here, an interior space, and we have lots of objects here. We have some furniture and other furnishings and objects around. And if we go ahead and rotate around this and look at this around, we can see what we have. Pretty basic scene setup, but things are going to get a lot more complicated here than they were before. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's get started with this. Let me come back to about this view right here, and I'm going to do a test render. And you can see that mental ray is already loaded up here. If you don't have mental ray loaded up, go ahead and load it up. So this is what we have by default here when we render out. It's rendering out with final gather by default. It's using all the default settings. I haven't changed anything. The only thing that's not default here is, of course, the scene itself. But the render settings and all that is at default. So let's go ahead and let's turn final gather off. Let's also enable geometry, the geometry caching over here. Because this is a more complicated scene, there's a lot more polygons here, so the translation process is actually going to slow us down by a little bit. So let's go ahead and use this geometry caching to get rid of that. Let's also reduce the image precision over here, the anti-aliasing from medium, which is the default, to low, just so it renders out faster. And if we render this out again, this is what we get. So we get a little bit of a faster render. We skip the translation, final gather, and we're rendering out with less anti-aliasing. Perfect. Okay, so this is very basic. It's using the default global lighting. Nothing looks good. Our job is to go ahead and set up the lighting for the scene using mental ray, lights, and using some of the features from mental ray. In this case, we're going to use global illumination. So let's go ahead and start to create our lights in this scene. Okay, so basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up 3 area lights, 3 mental ray area lights, one at the window at the far end over here. I'm going to place another one right here at this window and another one at this window that's over here. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's go to the create menu. Let's go to lights. Let's go to standard lights, and we'll go down here to the mental ray lights. And the one we want to use is an MR area spot. So we use the spotlight. Go ahead and just create this here and target it in toward the inside of the house there. Now let's go to the modify panel and adjust some of these settings. First of all, I'm going to take off the targeted option here. I don't want this to be a targeted light. Now let's try to rotate it so it's actually aiming right toward the inside there of our room. Let's move this up like so. Something like this. I'm going to come up here to the main menu up here, and I'm going to switch from view mode to world mode, and that's going to change my my world space mode. So down here where you see X, Y, and Z coordinates, I can actually position this a little bit easier. So in the X axis, I'm going to go ahead and position this at about negative 40, something like that. So I'm just go down here and type in negative 40, about negative 41, so it's right there in front of the window. Maybe a little bit hard to see things in our scene here, so let's do this. Let's come up here to our viewport options, right up here where it says smooth and highlights. Click on that, and let's go to hidden line mode. Yeah, we'll go to hidden line mode. There we go. It makes it a lot easier to see things here. Okay, so in the Y axis, let me move this to about, well, it's already at negative 32 right there, so that's actually not bad. Let me just use a clean number, negative 32. And actually I want this to be like in the middle of the window right there. Perfect. Okay. And in the Z-axis, 14 units high is actually pretty good. I'm just going to leave it like that. That's fine. Okay. Now if I were to go ahead and render this out from, say, inside the room here, it's not going to look too good, as you can see. Actually looks pretty horrible. That's not good. You can see the spotlight over here, and this needs to definitely be fixed. So let's make some changes in the modify panel over here. Let's go ahead and collapse the general parameters rollout. Let's open up the intensity rollout here. And what we're going to do is change a few things here. Let's go to the multiplier and let's adjust this multiplier and make this pretty bright. Let's go to 1500. And we're also going to take the decay and add some inverse square decay because we want this to look realistic. Let's come in here and let's render this out. See what we have. Okay, this obviously doesn't look too good. Let's go to the spotlight parameters down here. We need to increase the size of this cone because right now it's just it's too small. So let's just take the hotspot and beam parameter and just crank it all the way up, as far up as it lets us go, which is 179.5 degrees. Okay, so that's going to work out better. Let's do a test render from here. There it is. Still too bright, obviously. And right now this light is obviously rendering out way too bright. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to come here to the decay parameters, and you notice that the default setting is set to start at 40 units. I'm going to change that and tell it to start at 1 unit. And if you notice in the viewport, there's this cyan icon here. Looks kind of like a half dome right there in front of the light. If I put this back to 40 units, which was the previous setting, you can see it. There's the cyan icon. It's very big right now. So what I want to do is make it very small. So I'll go ahead and switch that to 1 to make it small. And let's go inside the room here and render again. See what we have. Okay, better. Now the light's a lot more manageable. Obviously this doesn't look too good. This is this huge blown out spot back here. But don't worry about it. We'll work on this lighting. Lighting itself is an art in computer graphics. So we'll get there. And then finally what I'm going to do is take the color here of the light and I'm going to give it a sort of soft cyan bluish color. Just to give this a little bit more of a little bit better of look here. So maybe a soft blue color like this will work out pretty well. So just go with something that's a nice soft blue environment type color. That'll work out just fine. Let's go ahead and have a look at this. Render this out. Okay, that's pretty interesting. Obviously still doesn't look too good, but we'll get there. We want to also go to the general parameters and make sure that we're using ray trace shadows. In this case I am. If you're not, go ahead and turn on ray trace shadows. Let's collapse some of these parameter rollouts here. Let's go to the area light parameters rollout. And we want to make some changes here. Right now the shape is a rectangle, which is perfectly fine. That's actually what I want. But the height and width is not too good. I'm not too happy with that. So what I want to do is increase this height here. And I'm going to increase it to 16 units. Which you could see in the viewport there is not the same size as the window, but pretty close. We don't want to make it too big because if we make it too big, it's going to need more sampling to have artifact-free shadows. And that's just going to increase render time needlessly. So I'm going to leave it like this. Let me render this out, see how that looks. Okay, pretty good. You notice that now we have some artifacting over here. That's because we made the area light bigger. And that's why you want to be careful. You don't want to overblow the size of the area light more than it needs to, because then you're going to have an artifacting problem and basically an anti-aliasing nightmare. So you got to be careful about that. Okay, since we already got that light set up, all we have to do now is clone this light and reuse it over and over again. So let's go ahead and activate the move tool here. I'm going to hold down shift while I pull on the y-axis here just to make a clone of it, and when my clone options pop up I'll just choose copy, hit OK, and that's fine. Alright, so let's pull this and let's place this in the y-axis. Let's place it around, let's see, about 23 units is going to be do just fine. So it's right there in the middle of this large window. We don't want to place one light per panel. We could, but that would just be a waste of render time. We can actually get away with just one light here in the center of this 3-pane window. Okay, now the height is already good and that's perfectly fine. Okay, now in terms of the parameters, I'm not going to change the size of the area light. I'm going to leave it like that. Again, I don't want to make it big because the bigger it is, the more artifacting we're going to have, and we're going to waste render time needlessly. So the only parameter I would probably change is the intensity over here. Now the intensity is set to 1500 right now, which is pretty good. But I'm going to go ahead and leave it like that. If later I need to change it, I'll come back and change it. Editor, edit that out of the video. There was a sound in the background. Start again in 3, 2, 1. Right now my intensity multiplier is set to 1500. I could change it. For the moment, I'm going to leave it alone. I might come back later and change it if I don't like the results later on. It's just too early to tell right now. So next thing I'm going to do is make another clone of this. So I'll hold down Shift, move this over, make a copy. Move this over here. And obviously I need to come in here and rotate this light around because it's facing the wrong direction. So I'll switch to the rotate tool. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to come up here and turn on my angle snap toggle in the toolbar, just so this thing snaps by 5-degree increments here by default. So I'll snap it to 90 degrees. Okay. In terms of the placement, let's go ahead and let's use the move tool here. In the y-axis, I think I'm going to leave it right there actually. That's actually pretty good. Maybe I'll move it just a little bit closer. That's perfectly fine. And in the x-axis, I'm going to leave it alone. The z-axis, the height's already fine. It's already pretty much at the center of the window. Maybe I'll nudge it a little bit. Now I'm just being picky though. And in terms of the parameters here in the modify panel, I think I'm just going to leave it alone at these settings. But you know what? Since these two lights, the one I just placed and the one just before that, are pretty close together, they're in pretty close proximity, their light intensities are going to combine and they're going to create a hot spot, a very hot spot in this area. So since these lights are so close to each other and these windows are allowing all this light to come in, I'm going to go ahead and change the intensity actually. I'm going to change it from 1500 to 1000. So I'm going to reduce it by 500. So I'm basically taking off about a third here of their light contribution, simply because they're going to combine and they're going to create a very bright area here. So I'll switch those two lights to 1000 instead of 1500 on their intensity multiplier. Okay, good. So now let me come in here inside this apartment and let's do a render from here and see what we have. You can see the lights are pretty bright, kind of blown out. We need to do some fixing to this, and we'll do that later actually, where we're going to tone map the lights in the lighting in this scene to make this look the correct way that it's supposed to look. Okay, so that's going to do it for these area lights. Now the final direct light that we're going to create here is a directional light to simulate a sun. So let's go ahead and let's go to create menu. Let's go to lights. We'll go to standard lights, and we want to get ourselves a directional light. Now we got two options here. We can go with a target directional or a regular directional. I'm going to go with just a free directional here. And just go ahead and click and drag in your viewport to create that light. Right click to end the create session there. And here's our light. Just going to move it up here. Okay. Now, right now it's a little bit crunched down. You can see it's a little bit squashed there. Let's go ahead and open up the modify panel here. And let's just go ahead and take this target parameter here. And let's just increase it. It encompasses the whole scene. Doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be exact. And we'll just leave that there. Let's go to the intensity and color attenuation here. Now, right now, what Max does by default, it takes settings that you used for previous lights and it keeps applying them, assuming that that's what you want. In this case, that's not what I want. I'm going to take this multiplier here. I'm going to knock it down to 1. I'm going to take the color also. I want it to be a warm, sunny type of color. So I'm going to go with a very light, pale yellow. Not too strong, not a very saturated yellow. I just want it to give a hint of yellow or of a warm color. Okay, we're not going to use decay because the light shouldn't decay when it's coming from parallel light rays from the sun. So we'll leave this alone. We don't have to mess around with any of these settings. So let's go to the directional light parameters here. And you just want to make sure that you look at this from the top here and that the perimeter here of this light encompasses the entire scene. So if we change this, you see how we can reduce the hotspot beam parameter? Just make sure that it takes up the entire scene. Okay? Again, it doesn't have to be totally exact, but just make sure that the whole scene is covered by the light, or else you're going to end up with some strange lighting. Okay? We won't change anything in advanced effects. Shadow parameters. Let's go back to the general parameters actually. This is very important. I'm going to make sure I turn shadows on. And I want to make sure that I switch from ray trace shadows here. I'm going to use mental ray shadow map. Okay? Alright. Let's collapse that. Let's collapse all these. Let's go to the mental ray shadow map parameters here. Okay, this is going to be very important. Let's come in here to our scene, and actually if we render this out, our shadows are going to go straight down, so we're actually not going to be able to see our shadows, and that of course is going to be a problem. So to fix this, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give this light a little bit of rotation, so it's going to be like the sunlight isn't directly above but is at a bit of an angle, so it's more like not like noon, but maybe 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So let's just rotate this a little bit. You can rotate it pretty much anywhere you want. Basically, the way I'm rotating it is so that the light is kind of aiming toward this corner of the apartment over here. Just a little bit, not too much. If I come in here and do a quick test render, I should be able to see the shadows from the light there. And there's the light coming in. Let me go ahead and angle this maybe a little bit more. A little bit more this way. And again, now I'm just being really picky here. Probably shouldn't waste too much time on just moving that light around. Let me just come in here and do a render from here. Okay, there we go. That looks pretty good. You can see the shadows there from this light. Okay. Now, right now, obviously, shadows don't look too good. You can see it's got these strange jagged edges and things. That's because our mental ray shadow map parameters, the default settings, are actually not very good. They're very low quality. The map size, for example, is only set to 512, which is no good. We need to change this map size and increase it. Now, we could go to about 2,000 or higher. I'm going to go ahead and just jump all the way to 4,000. I'll go with 4096. The reason I do that is because my brain thinks in terms of powers of 2. So that's why I choose that number. And over here in the sample range, it's set to 0.01. Let's go ahead and do a render region in this area. What I'm going to do is switch over here to the area to render, and I'm going to select the region option. So I can just do some render regions of this area right here, just to render out a little bit faster. Rendering out faster is always a good thing. And we'll just render that area out. Now you can see it, the shadow comes out nice and crisp. Very, very nice. Okay. Now here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to zoom in here. And by the way, you can adjust the region from in here inside the viewport. Okay. So I'll place this region about right here. And let me go ahead and do another render. Okay. So you can see that the shadow is actually pretty hard. I don't want the shadow to be perfectly hard like this because it doesn't look very realistic. It doesn't look very natural. So what I want to do is add some shadow softness to that. I can do that by adjusting the sample range parameter over here of the mental ray shadow maps. Okay. Now you notice it's not letting me adjust anything. That's because I have this little render tool active right now, the little render region. I need to go ahead and close it out. Now you can see it's a little bit difficult to see the little white X mark here that closes that little tool out. So I'll just move this to the side, and you can actually hit the little X box right here, the little X mark on the region tool inside the viewport to cancel it out and get out of that mode. Now I can come over here and I can adjust my parameters. So what I want to do is take the sample range and I want to change it from 0.01, which is the default setting, and I'm going to change it to something higher, like 0.1. I don't want to go too high, by the way, because that's going to ruin my shadows. You can see it's a little bit softer, a little bit difficult to see, but it is a little bit softer. Let's go ahead and increase that to 0.2. Render again. Now you can see it's much softer now. It does have some artifacting, but that's okay. We'll get rid of that a little bit later. Let's go ahead and increase it to 0.3. And now see what we get. And our shadows are even softer now. So this looks better. So I want a little bit of a soft edge. Not too soft because then it's not going to look like a sunlight. But a little bit of softness so it looks more natural and realistic. Now we do see that there is some artifacting there. To get rid of that artifacting, what you need to do is come over here to the samples parameter and increase it. 4 is too low. That's more like a preview setting. So let's just go ahead and jump to 16 samples. And let's render again. And now you can see that a lot of that artifacting went away and now it looks pretty smooth. The rest of the quality will be controlled by the anti-aliasing settings for mental ray, so we won't increase the samples anymore because it's just going to be a waste of render time. So that's pretty good. Okay, Now for the brightness, let's go to the intensity here in color attenuation. The brightness right now is set to a multiplier of 1, which looks pretty bright. I'm going to leave it like that, but chances are I'm going to have to change that later when I do my tone mapping. But I'm not going to worry about that now. Okay, so the sunlight is set up. I'm going to do a quick check of these lights. Check out one of these area lights. Make sure, okay, I got shadows turned on. Perfect. Okay, so one last thing that I want to do is, if you look at these area lights, and let's collapse all of these parameter rollouts. Let's go to the mental rate indirect illumination parameter rollout down here. This is where we control the photon mapping, the global illumination for these specific lights. Now by default, all the lights here are going to have the automatic mode turned on. That's perfectly fine. I'm not going to worry about that now. Now this sunlight up here, I'm going to select it. Let me close all these rollouts. Go to the mental rate indirect illumination rollout here. We can see that the automatic mode is turned on here. Ideally what I want to do is leave this mode off because I don't want this sunlight to emit any photons. I'm going to leave it on purpose just so that the render gets messed up later when we turn on global illumination. Just so that you see what happens when we leave this on here for the sunlight. Okay, so I'm going to create an error, a mistake on purpose, just so that you can see what happens. All right, so I'm going to end this scene here. Make sure to save your scene in case you've been working here for a while. And I'm going to end this here, and in the next video we're going to continue here and start to use global illumination.